What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your UFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at week number 6 of the United Football League season. We are on the second half of the regular season schedule. Pretty short ride that the UFL season ends up being, but we are going to be here to take you through to the end here. As always, I like to go through spreads and totals to look at which teams are set up to have the most success on the 4-game slate every weekend. And the first thing I go over is my favorite play on the board. Last week, we liked DC quarterback Jordan Ta'amu. Ta'amu delivered. Ta'amu gave us the best game of the season from any quarterback in the league. And we saw the defenders continue to throw the ball further downfield than any other offense in this league. They have a 13.3 yard average depth of target on in the last 3 weeks on 110 total targets. So a really, really awesome high upside role for fantasy football here. And the receiver that has the most upside, Chris Rowland, the slot receiver for the defenders, leads this team in targets, also has an extremely healthy amount of air yards. We are looking at a 28% share of team targets with 31 targets in his last 3 games, and an 18% share of team air yards at a healthy 8.6 yard average depth of targets. So Rowland's targets are definitely lower upside on a per target basis than Braylon Sanders and Cornell Powell. But we are seeing such an improvement over every other team in the league in terms of how far downfield DC is throwing that it sort of mitigates that. And Rowland, probably highest floor, also has access to a pretty high ceiling here out of all the DC receivers. We do have a little bit of an injury situation to watch here. DC playing in the first game on Sunday afternoon. Just one practice report in at this point for us to evaluate, but we should address that we saw Cornell Powell hit the injury report on Wednesday for the defenders. So if Powell is unable to go, we are going to be looking at Chris Rowland, and we are going to be looking at Braylon Sanders as the primary wide receivers, and we may see Javon Antonio see a tick up in usage if Powell's unable to go. Pure speculation at this point. We're going to have to wait until Friday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, to really know for sure. All right, on to spreads and totals. Despite the loss last week, the Birmingham Stallions are still the biggest favorites on the board, primarily because they're facing the San Antonio Brahmas at home here on Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. to close out the slate. Tough backfield for us to really get excited about, though, even though this is a great matchup for running backs and for production in fantasy. I think CJ Marable's probably the one that we want to select just because we're starting to see a lot more involvement in the passing game. He had 6 targets last week from Case Cookus in Cookus's first full game for the Birmingham Stallions and 8 rush attempts in that game. Ricky Person just 1 target. Even though he and Marable virtually split the rushing attempts, Marable had more upside in the passing game. Slightly more expensive this week at $7,500 versus $6,500 for Person. But I think if you're interested in a Birmingham running back on this spot, it's going to be CJ Marable. Your next biggest favorite here in week number 6. Battle of the bottom 2 seeds in the USFL conference. It does look like Houston has separated themselves from the pack here in this lower tier, and they're kind of the best, quote unquote, middle of the road to bad team in the league. Zaquandre White, probably the best play here. 11 plus carries in each of the last 3 weeks. We saw the target volume evaporate to just 1 target last week, and that's because this turned into a 3-headed monster. Kirk Merritt returned last week, 6 rush attempts, 1 target for him as well. So it does not appear that the running backs are getting targeted heavily by Jalen McClendon here in Houston's offense. But if you were to pick one of these guys to deploy in tournaments, I would probably go with the $7,200 Zaquandre White here at home against the Showboats. Week in and week out, the safest play at the position, still an exorbitant $11,400. Jacob Sailors, definitely worth slotting in, though. I think in low-risk contests, he's probably going to be the most popular player. Once again this week, you'll see him project for about 15 to 20 fantasy points, which is the highest amount out of any non-quarterback in the league, maybe even higher than the quarterbacks themselves here. St. Louis is also playing in the highest total game on Friday night to kick off the slate, and Sailors should be heavily involved in that offense. something that has been a little bit more difficult for Sailors to contend with the last couple of weeks is Max Duggan has been the more productive rusher in this backfield. We've got 20 rush attempts for 112 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns from Max Duggan in the last couple of weeks. If Duggan calls his own number down by the goal line, that's obviously going to impact the upside with Sailors, and maybe a reason why we should be interested in playing Duggan here. But as far as matchups are concerned, Sailors still very much in play. The most exciting opportunity to consider at the running back position, favored by 2.5 points at home. I do think this is a fluid situation, but Toa Taua is now the starting running back, I would say, or the number 1 running back for the Michigan Panthers. Logged more snaps than either Nate McCrary or Jaden Sheridan last week. Sheridan with just 6 total snaps. McCrary with 23. Toa Taua with 41. We saw 15 rush attempts, 2 targets. We are able to access this running back at just $5,800 as a home favorite running back with a really healthy weighted opportunity role. He's actually my number 2 play on this slate behind Jacob Sailors, and he's basically half the cost. So I do think Toa Taua, the best play of the bunch here with the favored running backs, and I definitely want to get him into my lineups this week. All right. Other running back situations with Arlington, a slight underdog here against St. Louis on the road. Kalen Ballage outperformed Day Hunter last week. 10 rush attempts, 3 targets. Day Hunter, just 6 rush attempts, 0 targets. So I think we can say definitively that Ballage is the starter now, and he would be the one I am most interested in here on Friday night for the Renegades. With Memphis, this has not yet been fully updated here on DraftKings. Jacob Cabote has been released by the Showboats. They signed former USFL New Orleans Breakers standout Wes Hills, previously of the Michigan Panthers last year, to be the 3rd running back. And then obviously we have backup Jalen Jackson as well in this backfield. But Deneric Prince, even though he's been really underwhelming all season long, probably the only guy worth considering here against Houston, especially because Wes Hills, even if he's active, not in our player pool. With the DC Defenders, we've seen them kind of give up on the running back position a little bit. And what I mean by that is the volume is going to Abram Smith. The efficiency is not there at all. He's got under 3 yards per carry, even though he is really seeing a ton of work. In fact, I think he might even be seeing the most work at the position in terms of rush attempts. He's got 74 rush attempts. The next closest player is Jacob Sailors with 66, averaging 2.6 yards per carry, has no rushing touchdowns, is giving us just 3.9 fantasy points on the ground per game. And we've seen DC kind of improvise this running game a little bit by just asking Ta'amu to call his own number and do it himself. He wasn't doing it in the first 3 weeks of the season, but in the last 2 weeks, Ta'amu, 10 rush attempts against the Brahmas, 8 last week against Arlington, a lot more willing to run because they're getting more production that way, frankly. So look for Ta'amu to continue to be a pretty dynamic playmaking threat, dual threat here on offense for DC, because they're flat out a much better team when Ta'amu plays that way, and it makes it hard for us to consider the running backs here. Smith definitely still a better play, I would say, than Deion Jackson. Jackson with just 6 rush attempts to 9 for Abram Smith last week. However, we did see Jackson get the touchdown. So maybe the field will flock to, no one's really playing either of these guys. Maybe the field will be interested in Jackson at cost, but I do think Abram Smith is the safer play here for tournaments. And then with San Antonio, Anthony McFarland, still very efficient on a per touch basis. The problem is this offense is horrible. So I don't think it was really worth playing anybody on the San Antonio side. All right, quarterback position. We look at implied totals this week. Birmingham favored by 10 against San Antonio. Case Cookus is going to be very popular because once again, Birmingham is going to have the highest implied team total. Although they did lose in overtime last week, we got a healthy 23.1 DraftKings points from Cookus in that game against the Showboats, and a lot of that was due to his upside on the ground, which we discussed in last week's video. So he retains that heading into this week's matchup with the Brahmas. We are looking, of course, for more efficiency, though, under center. Hopefully he'll complete over 50% of his passes and limit the damage as far as interceptions and fumbles are concerned here in week 6. Jordan Ta'amu with DC, once again, going to be my favorite quarterback play. DC is basically the best offense in the league right now, and I think we just lean into that with our 4-game slate lineups for the foreseeable future unless something changes with the Defenders' offense. And then hard to deny the rushing upside with the other two full-time starting quarterbacks that we should be most interested in here. Max Duggan of the St. Louis Battlehawks. If he's going to run the football 10 times a game, then I think we take notice and consider him a really, really awesome fantasy option. But the price is really accurate, and it's not necessarily something that is underpriced that we should take advantage of here. Bryce Perkins finally getting the nod to be the full starter for the Michigan Panthers from Mike Nolan this week. And we saw what he did with that over week 3 and week 4, he's put up over 20 DraftKings points in each of the last 3 weeks, but probably has the highest floor in the UFL, especially given his NFL pedigree, probably the best, quote-unquote, best skilled quarterback in this group that we could consider. So a lot of fun plays at the quarterback position. We have Tamu, Duggan, Perkins, and Cookus that I like the most. Perez tends to be the guy we keep leaving out because he does not have any rushing upside whatsoever. But that's the way it goes when we're looking to score fantasy points here. Shout out Luis Perez. You got your 13 seconds in the video. As far as where the field is going to be for low-risk contests, I do think Cookus is going to be the field's favorite quarterback, and I do think his Stallions defense will be everyone's favorite defense to play just because of that massive 10-point edge they have in betting markets against the Brahmas. And then for your popular wide receiver plays, Rowland's definitely in there. Other players that are going to be popular, Malik Turner, the number 1 receiver for the Michigan Panthers. In fact, when we look at last 3 weeks of play, Turner has a just shy of a 28% team target share, and he has 36% of team air yards, best weighted opportunity in that offense in the passing game. So Turner probably the best way to get exposure to Michigan's passing game with or without Bryce Perkins. We also still have Jacob Harris leading San Antonio in air yards, target share in recent weeks. And we got a really lengthy San Antonio Brahmas injury report on Wednesday that features Jontre Kirkland on it, that features Greg Ward on it, and Harris, who was on a report last week, so far looks clean this week, might be the best option to consider in the Brahmas offense for all lineup types this week. If Cornell Powell is going to be out, then I think we're going to see some really, really heavily concentrated ownership on both Roland and Braylon Sanders. So I like him for low risk. Memphis has Jonathan Adams. Adams is technically on our underperforming wide receiver list now because he hasn't had a blow-up game in 3 weeks, but the opportunities have still been there. I like him quite a bit. Low ADOT, high target volume all-star with Houston, Justin Hall. He will be popular this week. And then I think we'll round out the popular plays here with 3 guys that spring football fans probably know and love at this point. Siossi Mariner, who got us 100 plus last week in the one of the highest scoring games of the entire season. He'll be back as far as Mariners just behind Hall for me in my projections this week. And then we saw his triumphant return after a few weeks out due to injury. Hakeem Butler, 29.4 DraftKings points on 2 67-yard touchdown receptions last week for St. Louis. Hard not to click on him at just $7,300 when he's probably the best receiver in the entire UFL. Deion Kane, the number 1 option in Case Cookus' offense, with Birmingham carrying the highest implied team total. He would be the last guy I would think I would consider for low-risk lineups. We're looking for opportunities for players that are underperforming. So these are our underperforming wide receivers. Jonathan Adams is one of them this week, who also has no touchdowns in the last 4 weeks technically, but in our sample that we look at, which is the last 3 weeks. So that's a pretty nice opportunity. And then another receiver on this list that I haven't discussed yet, Tyler Vaughns with Arlington. He has 6+ targets in the last 3 weeks. He hasn't scored a touchdown at all this season, and he is the number 1 opportunity wide receiver in Arlington's offense. So I do think Tyler Vaughns is a great play here as well. That is going to do it for me here with week number 6 in the UFL, guys. Good luck this weekend, and we'll be back next week to talk to you about week 7.